Or like, well, go pray about it, or just deal with it. So like at a young age, I suppressed feelings, and when you get older, you don't know how to handle certain situations. I think it's not viewed at all. But if it is viewed with black women, especially, I can speak for black women, where if we don't act a certain way, we're viewed as angry or problematic or, things like that, especially black women like me, we get targeted a lot, as that angry black woman thing. Like,
there's some good stuff happening in the chat. Get
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say there's some messages in the chat. First, Marie says, for some of us, we don't know we have mental health issues until we become adults. Kayla says, yes, in the Black community, we are raised not to feel, which I think caused a lot of anxiety and depression. Now, instead of coping, we're just floating through life. Jocelyn says, there's a generation trauma in the Black community when it comes to mental health, and it's often looked at as a stigma. The idea that Dr. Crystal says, the idea that the Black community was to support the needs of others rather than their own. The commodity of the Black body, you were taught to push through and neglect your own needs and to be present for others.
I'm feeling that right now. Yeah. I'm feeling that right now in this political climate where like people are like, they're in the find out stage and then they want to come back and be like, oh, help, we need to collaborate this. And I'm like, no. Yeah.
And it's sad to say that there are some people in our community that are finding out.
Yep.
And I'm like, and I it's sad because I see the story behind it. Right. I think these two more. So you and you. Okay, yeah.
Me coming from a big family as it is, of like 8 kids, I think they experience a lot of different mental health issues. Such as like my siblings, they all mostly play sports. And with coaches, they always get intense and criticize them. Some can't take it well, some take it too personally and they go into their own head. Like I have one sister who's in denial about her mental health to a point where she collapses at times. She just forgets to take care of herself. Or I have a different sister who when she can't handle the pressure of anything, she just starts to suffocate all of a sudden and have a panic attack. Yeah. My mom tries to offer, you should maybe go to therapy. But they always be like shut down and say, no, I'm fine.
I'll do you and then Nina will be the next one. So.
From my experience, it's been seen more of like, instead of a setback, more like an excuse. In a way where like, with a setback, there's like room to grow. Whereas an excuse, like, it's unacceptable.
Okay. Yeah. So, a lot of good opinions here, and they're all facts. Right? I sit with people and their stories all day long. Granted, I signed up for it, so I find fulfillment in that work. But I hate the validity of what you're saying. We have a history of denying our experiences, right? And there's a reason for that. So I'm going to go on. I think as we go, like I have a lot packed in here, and I'm trying to get through it all. So just like have our thoughts, like we're open for discussion. But I wanted to, they come back. Yeah, okay. So I was like, that was the next one. Okay. So if anyone's ever sat through a counseling and wellness presentation, if you ever talked with me, if I ever worked with you, whatever, I always look at people through your mental health, your mental wellness is determined by what we look at is probably in these dimensions. So there's the 8 dimensions of wellness. Whenever I have some people come into my office, they're like, I don't know, I'm just angry, I'm just upset, I'm just whatever. I'm like, okay, let's look at what's happening in your life. Because what's happening in my training, I look at person and environment. What's happening to you? We have sometimes been taught that our mental health is the result of individual failure or flaw. That is more than likely not true. Are we well in these? Like, do you have money to pay your rent? Housing is a mental health crisis, right? Do you, environment, if you're getting shot at, how are you supposed to feel okay and safe, right? That don't make no sense. So I'm sitting here saying, oh, you just got depression, anxiety, or how about I'm appropriately reacting to where I'm at, right? Physical, right? We think about kind of like what we intake into our body affects us. But if you live in a food desert, is that a you problem, or is that where you're at? So I look at this specifically, especially with Black mental health, because we have dealt with so much oppression specifically that has affected all of these areas. Targeted, intentional, right? And so I will come back to this, but I want y'all to keep this framework in mind as we go forward. So I'm going to just throw this in here. This will be relevant as we go. But lately, all this bull that's happening has been really hitting me, right? And I don't know what to do about it. So I like to dance, like Zumba. I love me some Zumba, right? Because like, I don't know, the drums, whatever, it's ancestral. I love it. So I just want to play this song because I also want to acknowledge Blackness does not belong in America. There's a Pan-African experience. And so this is a song from Joe Oroyo, and he is a Black Afro-Colombian man. And I just want to play a song because it's something that has been helping me. And if your body wants to move, go ahead. I might move a little bit too. Oh, where's the belly? That's a good question. I think, is it under the Zoom? I might need to stop sharing. I apologize, y'all. We're going to start this back in a second. I want y'all to feel the drums. I want you to feel the beats. And it won't let me do Okay. There's an English translation, so we know what's up. But I feel like this the Black woman. Still very relevant, right? So we can go to the next slide. For those of you that don't know about salsa, I'm just thinking, because I think sometimes we think our communities are not as broad as they are. The slave ship came here and it went down there too. The slave ship went all through the Western Hemisphere. So salsa is actually a combination, a lot of African beats and rhythms combined with indigenous and Spanish to create salsa, right? A lot of Black influence, African influences in Latin America, right? So our brothers and sisters down there, we cannot forget them. But next, why do I play that song besides this dope message? I want to come back to the power of storytelling, right? We've talked about this in the space before. When we share our stories, we are sharing our history. We are sharing our current reality. We have the opportunity to connect with one another. Like, how many of y'all knew that music like that existed and they said like stuff like that? So did you know that they talked about Black history in salsa music? Mm-hmm. Awesome, right? So maybe a little bit, right? I didn't know it. When I was like, I hear it when I'm going to the restaurant in my margaritas, but I'm like, I didn't know that's what they were saying. So I was like, this is dope, right? But there was a story there. Black people, no matter where we're from, we have a story and we will tell it, and creatively. It's an act of resistance, right? That song is about rebellion. Like, don't hurt that Black woman. It's an expression of our emotions. And storytelling is also individual and collective. They are sacred. We are kind of secretive. Like, when you ask people to know about their story, especially when I'm sitting there, it's not easy. We don't easily give our stories because they're sacred. And we get hurt when we tell our stories. So, but we need to understand our story so that we can take a step towards liberating ourselves. Because if we don't understand our past and what we've been through and know when it's repeating itself, we're going to get lost in how to deal with it. The next slide. Okay. So I'm going to give you all a little information about trauma, and I'm naming this the story of the wound. If you think of trauma as anything, think of it as a wound. So trauma is defined as an overwhelming or deeply distressing experience that has significant and prolonged effect on an individual's physical, emotional, and cognitive well-being. It is not what happened. It is how you responded to what happened, right? So for example, I tell people, 2 people can be in a car accident. One person can walk away from a really bad car accident. One's like, let's say you're on a Dan Ryan, you see those cars, you go, damn, what did they do, right? Somebody can walk away from that accident and be like, okay, I'm fine. I can get in the car. It's just like a one-off. Another person might be like, I am never stepping in a car again. I am shaking. I am nervous. I don't want to deal with it. The response is the trauma, not what happened. So now we want to break down, I'm giving you just some basic info on like what trauma is. There might be what we call big T traumas. These are more like the severe events, life-threatening events that might happen to someone. This could be like you were held at gunpoint. Someone tried to kill you. There was like abuse happen, like physical, like there's a threat to your body. That one is more categorized with something where you would see like a PTSD, like someone went to war or something like that. There's a clear event that caused it. You probably were fine and then this happened. Small T traumas are considered a little bit objectively less life-threatening and less significant, but when they accumulate over time, they're gonna affect us. So that might be coming back to maybe what Jeremy said, maybe the consistent of your parent denying your feelings. Maybe I feel abandoned and nobody's here for me. Maybe that I'm getting constant comments on like how I look, microaggressions, things like that. These are the little things that build up, that affect us, that we're like, oh, I don't have trauma because like no one tried to hurt me. But if you have not felt safe or been connected to people in that kind of way, that is a small T trauma. That is where I see a lot of times at NOU, it's called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not an official diagnosis in the DSM. I have my own opinions about that, but sometimes we have both. We might have PTSD and complex trauma. right? That is a mess. There's also something called vicarious trauma. So that is the experience of distress after being exposed to another's trauma. This can occur through what we see in media, in work settings, or relationships. Like at some point, I'm sorry, y'all, I can't remember all the Black people killed by police. I don't want to know. It's sad because I'm like, you see these videos over and over and over and over and over and over and over. You tell me that doesn't have an effect on us? Come on now, right? Even when I see, it's just like, and this might be me being a little bit of an empath, right? But this is, if I'm seeing someone else in pain constantly, I'm going to be affected. So you can either have these small things happen to you over time, one big thing, or a couple one big things, or seeing pain. The Black community has seen it all.
Erica just said we need a DSM for Black people, probably per race. So
Yeah.
Yes,
I like that.
The DSM is the Diagnostic
Diagnostic
Statistics Manual. That is what we use to diagnose people with a mental illness. So mental health applies to everyone, right? But mental illness is like the more so the categorization of the symptoms you're experiencing that result in a disorder, right? So before I go into talking about trauma, I just want to tell y'all, like, we have a body. Many people throughout history have tried to say our bodies are different than them, our brains are bigger, smaller, whatever, all that kind of stuff. Let me just tell you how the human operates so you can understand a little bit going forward. Just being a human is stressful. No matter what color of skin, you're going to have stress. That's just what comes with life, right? Our body has the ability to deal with that stress, and that's called being our window of tolerance. Now, our ability to problem solve, be present, respond to your emotions versus reacting. That is like being in your window. I'm calm, I'm cool, I'm collected, I'm in control of myself. Sometimes we can get a little dysregulated. So dysregulation, like up here says, you might feel increasingly frustrated or agitated, urges to explode happen, but you're still in control. Same on this other end. You might feel like tired. I want a little bit shut down. I'm going to zone out a little bit, but I'm still here. Now let's say you are going into a state where you are feeling like this all the time. That is something called hyperarousal. So that's when you are feeling overwhelmed, anxious, out of control. You have the urge to fight. You might be really irritable all the time, really aggressive all the time, or really anxious all the time. You might be hyperventilating, shaking, hypervigilant sometimes, like always like, what's going on? Like when I've dated people sometimes and they were Black and they'd be like, I just need to see the door. I'm like, why do you need to see the door? Just because, in case some shit pop off, right? Hypervigilance, right? On the other end of this is hypoarousal. So basically hypoarousal is that consistent feeling of like, I'm numb, I feel dead, I'm very passive, I barely feel here, I can barely function. This is where depression lives. I included this over here, fight, flight, freeze, because these are the stress responses. We are supposed to go into these when appropriate, right? So let's say like you're normal, fine. Someone comes up like, hey, like give me your car. Like they got a gun. You should go into one of these. That's the body saying I'm not safe. So that's just the body's natural reaction to do something. But trauma is when you are in your fight, flight, freeze, and nothing's unsafe. When the clear threat's not there and you're still acting like that, that is trauma. Right? Your alarm system in your brain is consistently saying alert, 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 alert. If y'all think of like if a machine keeps running all day long with no break, what's going to happen to that machine? It's going to shut down. Our brains and our bodies are like machines. They're not indefinite. They need breaks, right? So to also give you an understanding, being in dysregulated or in hyperarousal is better than being in hypo. Think of hyper as, okay, I can still face this. I can run. I can fight. But when you're in freeze, that's your body like, I'm just surrendering. I cannot do anything. It is really hard to get out of hypo. So when I have any folks here struggle with depression, that shit is hard. for a reason, right? It's your body saying, I'm shut down. This, you do not choose what your body does. Your body chooses it. So it's not like when people, I've heard some people who are victims of sexual assault, they're like, why didn't I fight? I'm like, you didn't choose that. Your body did. Your body chose to protect you. So I don't want y'all to think that you can choose necessarily when you go into these. It's just an automatic function of your body, right? But with awareness, we want to be able to change it. And I want to point to these on the side. So when it says things that shrink our windows, our ability to deal with stress and easily get dysregulated can be impacted by what we experience. So like trauma, if you are under pressure, you're not getting a lot of sleep, just all those things, we're not taking care of ourselves, our ability to just deal with stuff gets a little bit shorter. So when I work with people is like, how do I widen that window? So stuff doesn't easily make you shut down or pop off. That might include different things like going to therapy, grounding, music. And I'll mention some of those things that we've done, but just because your window is short does not mean you can't reopen it, right? It just takes intentional work. So this is like a real base understanding of trauma. Yeah, you had a...
I was just wondering, will we have access to the PowerPoint after?
Sure. I don't see an issue with this. Yeah, sure.
Please.
Yeah. So I also want you to know, when we talk about some being trauma informed in my care, how I look at people has to change. The narrative and the story has to change. It has to change from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Mm-hmm. Right? Because we always like, dang, what's wrong with that person? But when you hear their story, oh, that makes sense, right? Story, the power of the story. So with Blackness, we have to think of, there's nothing wrong with us, y'all. There's nothing inherently, because of the color of our skin, wrong with us. More melanin does not equate to a mental illness. That is not the issue. But we have to look at what happened to us to understand why we do what we do. Right? And I always tell people with trauma, you might not have asked for what happened to you, because this is where we get the issue. You might not ask for what happened to us and all the stuff that affected us, but it is our responsibility to fix it. It's the unfortunate gift that we have. All right, you can go to the next one. So I also just want to mention, so we talk about this trauma. I have to expand this lens out, because when it talks specifically again about Black mental health, this is not an individual problem. We as a community have dealt with stuff. So the types of trauma people can have are developmental, right? That could be like maybe you lost someone in your family growing up. You're witnessing violence. There's abuse in your home. Sometimes in birth, people have trauma at birth, right? And the Black community and gynecology is really dark, right? It's a really dark history. Look it up if you want to, but it's not a good history at all. Like we're experimenting on the female vagina and uterus without pain medication. We're just going in there, right? That is the history. Then we get to transgenerational trauma. So this might be, have we all been poor for like, has grandma been poor, mama's poor, and now I'm poor? Like that is generational. We look at refugee, something in this country, I don't think we realize the Great Migration from a lot of Black folk being in the South, moving up to North is because we were refugees, y'all. Jim Crow was not a good thing. Lynching, which is still not legally illegal, was still not illegal.
As of 2022.
Oh, really? They changed it? Oh, okay, dope. So 2022 to make lynching illegal? Come on now. We were refugees. Some of the Great Migration, my grandmother, my mom was born in 66. I think the Civil Rights Act was passed, 64, 62? So this is very recent. We're not far from Jim Crow, right? I might have the dates wrong, but it was not too long after that. So these are things that we have people alive here to talk about these things. You think the way what grandma and grandpa went through did not somehow get passed on and affect us? It's still alive. We're not too far from it, y'all. We're not too far from it. Then we get to systemic trauma that affects even those things, like obviously slavery, one of the main outlets into how Black Americans exist in this country is because of slavery, police violence, war, political control. Like even people who come from different countries, again, Pan-African. This stuff happens in all different countries all the time, right? We'll go to the next one. So people in general can be exposed to this, but I want to point this out as well. I believe in the idea of intersectionality, meaning our different identities are going to affect how we experience things. The experience of a Black man is different than that of a Black woman. The experience of a Black cisgendered person is different than a transgender person, right? We all have different privileges. Like I have the privilege, it's barely one, but I have the privilege of being a citizen. We have undocumented folks who are really scared right now, rightfully so. I have that privilege, I understand that. And I feel like a subclass citizen because I'm Black and I'm a woman. There's also policies coming after me about that. So I want y'all to be mindful of your experience of trauma could also be determined by where you fall in the realm of power and oppression, right? The idea ideally is everyone can have it. Even white cisgendered men can have trauma, but those identities are not going to cause you probably as much potential for harm as mine, right? So you have to understand your experience through the lens of power and oppression. So now I'm going to this, right? Because again, understanding our story as Black people, there's a study called the ACEs, right? What experiences make it more likely that we're going to have health issues, mental health issues, things like that. We look down here, we talk about, it says poverty, discrimination, community disruption, lack of opportunity, poor housing, violence. There are clear stories of our community going through all of that, right? I've been on this kick with documentaries lately. Community disruption, they've killed all our liberation leaders. Since Black History Month, MLK, Malcolm X, all of them, we want to name them, they murdered them. Because the fight for liberation is not something this country is for. We've had that happen. To say that that did not disrupt the Black community in any way, we have to look at how that affected us. It's hard to fight now because we might have this internal ancestral fear, what they're going to do to us. And they seem that they've tried a lot. When I say they, I mean those in power, right? Now, how does this stuff come out? It might lead to, of course, having mental illness, being incarcerated, physical neglect, abuse. I think back to like just stories we've had. Like, for example, when they say, oh, Black people get together and do what you need to do. I'm like, well, when we have examples, like if anyone's heard of Tulsa, after slavery, we were doing it. Like we were getting our communities together. And then they burned it down. Right? And we tried to advance and they burned it down. That's trauma. When I think about, in relation to mental health, when I think about like the crack epidemic, you know, as Black people, we're like, oh, crack like messed us up, right? But it really did. That, if you look at it from a different perspective, that was a public health crisis. Why do we have all these people smoking crack? Why do we do drugs in the first place? Because we want to feel better. We're going through pain. But instead of looking at that as public health, that turned into put us in jail, criminalize us. Where we look at the most recent opioid crisis, which predominantly did not affect us, that's a public health problem, right? So I can get why for some reason, Black people are like, mental health doesn't exist because we didn't have the privilege for us to acknowledge what we felt, to get help for what we felt. That might be learned when we say like, pray about it, do that, because sometimes that's all we had, right? So,
yeah, I was gonna say like, I think it's kind of ironic, where like they give us, when they was giving us these like freedoms to do stuff, I'm thinking like they're not gonna do nothing with it, and we exceeded expectations, and I didn't hear like, hell no, we gotta do something about it.
Yeah, tear us down. There's never, and I think what's happening right now politically, again, I watched this documentary, I'm like, there's always some kind of backlash to our progress. I think what we're seeing now is in connection to Obama. They are lashing out. Oh, he had the nerve to be president? So now let's get extra radical. Let's get back to what America is. It's a business that was meant for white, able-bodied, cisgender men.
It reminds me of a quote that W.E.B. Du Bois said, how does it feel to be seen as a problem? So he said that white America looks at us as the problem. And so when you gave that example of like the crack epidemic, we were the problem instead of the drugs and what got us there being the problem.
And how the drugs got us.
Exactly. So considering, instead of seeing us as problematic, like what underlines that?
Right.
What environments have been created, and then do you see me or do you see me as, how about knowing me before you know me as a problem?
Yeah. Yes, but there seems to be this active, we don't want to know you. We came as property. They never saw us as human, right? So that trickles down. When people are like slavery is over, I'm like, y'all understand the history. There was slavery, and then after Reconstruction, again, knocking us down. Jim Crow, when we get into all these modern day policies, like they've never stopped, right? You gotta know your story so you can know your future. Right? Yeah.
I think everyone should kind of brush up on Black codes. There was a lot that was put into the environment when people found out that they were free. Like even a simple reference letter. You fill out your resume. That was because they wanted to make sure that Black people would go back to plantations because they wanted to make sure that, hey, you can't work somewhere else. So there's so many things that were put into place to stop Black people from thriving. And even with all of that, same thing as credit scores. Credit scores were the thing to the 90s, 1990. Before then, same thing with college. They're like, oh, well, you need a college degree to do X, Y, and Z. And Black people are getting college degrees out of the wazoo. So I think that even now, a lot of people don't understand that a lot of the things that are in place currently is simply just because they wanted to have some kind of barrier for Black people.
Yeah, it is.
And the body remembers that, right?
And the body
remembers. Yeah, the body.
Even just saying, like, one of the hot topic terms right now, birthright citizenship. That had nothing to do with Latinos or whoever else, right? That was because, here's the thing, when we get to slavery, and actually the freedom of slavery wasn't because, oh, they're human. No, it just wasn't good for business no more. It was not as profitable to be like, oh, we're doing this, doesn't look good, but that doesn't mean they saw us as equals or as human. Birthright citizenship was, citizenship didn't even exist before, right? And then it's like, oh, now, but we want rights. So they had to say, because the descendants of slaves, they're here now. They got it, like they want citizenship, birthright. Had nothing to do with what it's being used for today, right? So when they say revoke birthright citizenship, that could come back to us, right? Understand your history. Go ahead. Big topic, right? So I'm trying to get through this. Just understand that everything we've been through, remember what happened to us. That's the story. Generational trauma is a thing. If I think now, like, dang, why did I maybe grow up struggling to communicate? Maybe because my mom struggled to communicate with her mom. Why did she struggle? Because my Grammy went through a lot. But why did they struggle? It makes sense if you look at the story. She didn't know how to express herself. Why did she not know how to express herself? When have Black people been freely able to express ourselves without some issue? We couldn't even write. We couldn't even learn to read. Those are some of the main reasons or ways how we tell stories. So if you understand what happened and it's functional, and also trauma is protective. We do a lot of stuff to protect ourselves. It might seem like, oh, this is keeping us from living, but it's survival mode. We're all stuck in survival, right? Even so much that something called epigenetics exists. And I'm gonna just kind of brush it up and saying, one time I felt really anxious, and I talked to my old boss, Cindy, and I was like, dang, why am I anxious? I have no reason to be anxious. And she was like, it might not be you, it might be your grandma. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, basically, how, like to say my grandmother experienced time of Jim Crow, single mother, abusive family. She had a lot of anxiety in her body. Our stress produces chemicals like cortisol. Cortisol changes the formulations of our body. It changes how our genes are expressed. So let's say she had stress, my mom had stress. Now I might have an expression in my gene where there might be a gene that might more quickly release a stress hormone because it's just over time, our genetics just has so much pressure. So I don't even have a chance. I could just be born with a short window because of what my family went through. Right? This stuff is biological. Trauma is actually more physical than anything. So I'm saying the story continues. The impacts and efforts of racism and capitalism. Y'all, I'm very anti-capitalist. That's the only reason why we exist. We were profit. We were here for profit. The making of money. Some people think capitalism, I just want to make money and whatever, but that's not where it started. That's not its original intention. It was for all of us to make money. No, we were property. Racism and capitalism have not disappeared, but they've just transformed us. The gaslighting, the manipulation, and the violence, it carries into current events. We're seeing it. Policies that people like in my grandmother's generation and fought and died for are being revoked. But I hurt for it, but I'm not super shocked because I'm like, this is the history. They doing what they always did. The system is working. It wasn't meant for us, right? I include this quote because I think sometimes we also think if we're not the ones directly being targeted, then we don't have to worry about it. Fannie Lou Hamer, she was an activist at the time. She mentioned, nobody's free until everybody's free. If you can over there and oppress someone else, what means you can't oppress me? I'm not going to think like, oh, just because someone else is going through it, I'm safe. Nope, that's never been the case, right? We have to think now, what we see, even if it's not directly affecting us, we should pay attention because it's potential to harm us too, right? Go to the next one. So real quick, as I'm thinking, now how do we move forward? Yes, we have a history of being hurt, but I have this reference, but I'm just giving it, I don't necessarily like it, but I'm gonna use it. I said, Black people are like roaches. You can try to kill the hell out of us. You can drop our heads off. We are still here. We're not roaches, but we got the resilience of one. They didn't try so much to kill us and destroy us and erase our history, but we're still here. So even though there's a legacy of harm, there's a legacy of resilience. How do we move through this grief we feel? And grief can be, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm hurt. How do we move through the fear? Sometimes we got to go back to what did our ancestors do? It's in us. These answers are in us. I just want to reemphasize what that is. Give some quotes. Audre Lorde. When we talk about self-care, that has been co-opted and taken to say, oh, get a spa, go get your nails done. That's not what self-care is. Audre Lorde said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So get your sleep, drink your water, take care of yourself, say no. Because that's the kind of stuff accumulated over time is going to kill us. She said, it's not indulgent. It's I need to preserve myself. Next slide. Trisha Hersey, she is from here. She's from Harvey. She made a book called Rest is Resistance. Read it, please. Great book. She says, you were not just born to center your entire existence on work and labor. You were born to heal, to grow, to be a service to yourself and community, to practice, to experiment, to create, to have space, to dream, to connect. You ever wonder, what is the purpose of life? It ain't work. It's not this work, living day to day. It's not that. We must believe we are worthy of rest. We don't have to earn it. It's our birthright. It's our most ancient and primal needs. Your rest is resistance. Amen. So I played that song for y'all, right? Y'all be like, why should she play that besides the story? The music, right? One thing I know, we know how to heal ourselves. Some of this is very cultural. So for example, somatic movement through dance. If we go back to Africa and the tribes, they had no sit-down therapy. They had dance, move your body, yoga, stretching, walking, y'all, even twerking, believe it or not, right? It's something called bilateral stimulation. When we lift and we do that, it's sending messages to the left and right brain, telling us to calm down. You probably didn't think that was a mental health practice, but it is. When you see your grandma, you ever see grandma rocking? Like, ooh, like I see my grandma, like she just does this sometimes. Bilateral stimulation, helping you calm down. Connect back to our bodies. Singing, humming. There's a vibration there. It calms us down. It activates soothing. Spiritual practices. Y'all, like, not saying you have to love everything about the Black church, but the Black church was essential in our movement. So it's meditation, prayer. If it's not through Christianity, connection to our ancestors, energy cleansing, nature. These are things that are healing to us. Connection to community. Y'all, we are not individualistic people. We like to be around each other. Like, that's what community is, where it's at. This is where we organize. We need community to help us heal. This is the last one. And also for yourself, we want to build awareness of ourselves. And when we're doing things that compete against what we want, we can't, when I'm sitting with clients, I'm like, I can't help you if you're not aware. Connect to your values. Let them be a guide for what I need to do in this hard world. Practice radical self-compassion. Treat yourself with kindness. Find your strengths, right? Reject narratives that say we're not good enough. There's a lot of ways to do it, and I know we're running out of time, but healing is in us and we know how to do it. So understand your history, understand what happened to you, so you know how to move forward. Okay. The last one, if y'all need any help, you want to talk more, I know there's so much that's probably people's minds, come visit us, right? Representation matters. That's why we're like, hey, like, we got a lot of BIPOCs down there. We know what's up, right? So, I know it's a lot, but.
There's food, grab food on your way out before you go to class, for those who can.
And the slide. So send the link out before everybody leaves.
I'm going to email it out to the people who attended today.
Mm-hmm.
They want your contact info too.
Y'all can reach me. I have a specific one, but I check that one every day too. So if y'all want to reach out, like, please, something I don't know.
If I add your email.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. It was
Thank
great
you.
to have you, Zoomies. You're amazing. I'm glad you were here.
That was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
That was